And so there are a lot of folks that have stayed here at Eastern. And got their degree in student affairs at Eastern. And then there are people like Rodney Raines at Only Central College. He's the new president there. He's one of my students. Stuff like that.
You've been here 30 years?
I've been here, this is the end of my 25th year here. I taught at Michigan State for 18 years before that. And then before that, I was at University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, in Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
You taught there?
Yeah, I taught Oshkosh.
Well, now, when did you teach in Wisconsin, eh?
1999 to 2000.
Oh, yeah.
I was just there a year, and then I came back down to Illinois. So I taught at-risk kids.
Well, you didn't stay there long enough to pick up the language then.
I did not.
Oh, you wouldn't have had time to get used to the bubblers.
Exactly. That put me off. Some kid, can I go to the bubbler? Bubbler? It's a water fountain.
Oh, okay.
Huh?
Yeah. I hadn't even thought about that.
I thought maybe it was a restroom.
I did too.
They wanted to go to the bubbler. What they're talking about.
You got to pick up the language of the area, no? Well, all of my work has been in higher education. And one of the most interesting things for me has been my volunteer work in higher education, because I've been a student group advisor from literally the day I started graduate school at Syracuse University in the fall of 1963. So we're just at 49 years now. Literally, I was able to go to graduate school because my fraternity sent me to Syracuse to be the advisor for the chapter. Well, that's led to a lot of curious behavior on my part, because I'm from Macomb, Ohio, and that's just a few miles south of Toledo, Ohio, which is right next door to Findlay, Ohio, and you'd recognize that as a home of Marathon Oil Company. You know, we've got some folks here in central Illinois that's worked for many years at a Marathon refinery. Well, we're working on this master's degree in college student affairs, and having the students in that group as my laboratory raised all kinds of questions in my mind. How do these people end up doing what they do? And what is going on here that they behave as they do? Because certainly what I learned in the very quiet rural fields of Ohio was not what these kids coming out of the Bronx and Brooklyn, in a majority, were learning in their lives. And yeah, they did some bullying, they did some hazing that frankly I thought was enough to cross my eyeballs. They also did some things. If you've ever seen West Side Story and the fights between the Jets and what's the other group?
The Sharks.
The Sharks.
Yeah.
I even had a situation where I walked in the middle of the two groups while they had the tire change in their hand and said, "You will not fight." I had to be that person who intervened. I didn't realize how dumb I was for doing that. On the other hand, it brought them up short, and they went back to their respective locations. And then I had an opportunity to take the group I was working with them and ask them, what were you doing? What was the reason you decided that you had to have some kind of rumble, some kind of fight? I really resonate with what you folks do in physical education. Frankly, I wish all teachers had the freedom that folks in physical education do to teach real, tangible life skills. Because you're hands-on. And so many of our students, particularly the guys, are hands-on. And they don't get the opportunity to be hands-on in their other classrooms. They don't get the kind of feedback. No, I'm on all kinds of soapboxes here. They don't get the kind of feedback they do in physical education. Because if you're teaching them how to shoot a basket, doesn't matter man or woman, they know right away whether they made the basket or not. And they also know because they just went through that movement, and you adjust, you show them, and they see the difference in the movement, then they see what to do to make that basket. They have a physical, visual, oral sense of what to do to make that basket. Boy, wouldn't it be nice if kids had that kind of a chance in mathematics? Wouldn't it be nice if, things are improving. We're getting computer programs that give that kind of instant feedback, and that's helpful. We need more of it. And I really think that all these student video games are real assets, because the students are learning all kinds of things from video games as they play those games. That fine-grained hand-eye coordination that you teach large body skills, then you work to get to the finer skills. Here they are in the video games working with the finer skills. Damn, there's a lot of things in our life, in your lifetime, that's going to be managed just by those fine skills. I probably will not sit in a car that's self-driven in my lifetime, but you will. And it was all by those little skills. I listened to the keynote speech. She's focusing on junior high school. All of my career has been in higher education. All of the figures, all of the kinds of things that Dr. Esplanade listed for junior high schools and frequencies are true in higher education, just our older students. Well, we'll wait till the folks come in. Now, some of the folks, did you get those yellow evaluation forms?
Yes.
Oh, great. That's my other job. I'm the program evaluator for this. So, half of my life was spent doing program evaluation, and the other half of life has been here at Eastern doing college student affairs. Okay, y'all come in. Hello, hello. By golly, you must be Methodist.
Pardon?
You must be Methodist.
Why?
You're sitting right down in the front.
Oh.
I can't see very well, so I say.
Oh, that makes you Baptist.
I am Baptist, actually.
Our son is a Baptist pastor.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I was raised Baptist.
Well, I'm guessing, a couple days ago they told me I'd have about 19 people. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. That must be it. There's lots of ways folks teach. They teach individually. But And another way they teach is to work with students in groups outside the classroom. And my interest is really in working with students in groups outside the classroom. Because I think a tremendous amount of learning goes on outside the classroom. It's fascinating to me how here you are sitting this way, and I'm standing here, and you're there. Now I could bend over and touch one of you. And yet in the way we have organized what we call learning, probably the biggest gap in education is the distance between where I stand and the first row of seats, because there is very little intermixing, interacting in a formal classroom. But when we get out in a situation, and I'll again go back to the folks who are teaching phys ed. Yeah, you have a situation like this every once in a while, but an awful lot of time, there is an enormous amount of chaos, and people are going on and they're working all over the place, and you're going from here to here to here to here. Much as you would if you were working with an informal group of students in conversation in a club or organization. Now, all of my work is done over the last 49 years with clubs or organizations, and it's from that perspective with a particular one that I'm working on. Now let's see if we can pick this up here. I guess I hit this? No, that's a pointer. Okay, what do I do next? Oh, there it is. I figured it out. This is one of my favorite little posters. I just repeated it. So I didn't have to do this. And over the years, I thought I never would survive doing these things. But you know what? We do overcome it. We do get it done. We do survive. So help me to meet this self-imposed and totally unnecessary challenge. Now, what I would like you to consider is the difference between think, feel, and believe. Because a lot of folks misuse those terms. If you think, then you're reflecting on new information that may change your mind because it's new information. And it changes the organization of information that you've been contemplating. If you feel, think about how much this is used, then you're driven by emotion, much like the wind from one moment to the next. We had a little bit last Tuesday night in some of the television activities. And if you believe, no amount of argument is going to change your mind because you believe. There's an enormous difference between those words, and yet folks tend to use them interchangeably when they create a great deal of confusion, when they are used interchangeably. I would say that building bridges to belong is easily the theme of my career in higher education, because I have been interested in how students interact with each other and what I can do as an advisor, a teacher, a facilitator to promote that interaction, to encourage, to listen, and let students tell me what they would like to do. So, I'm focusing on group mentors, and that was an original function of faculty in American higher education. You went to college at a time when you could decide when you wanted to get up in the morning. You could decide when you went to go to bed at night. In early American higher education, you all got up at 5 a.m. You all went to Vespers, religious service. Then you went to breakfast. Then you had a little bit of physical activity because somebody had to stoke the stoves and cut the wood and prepare, and that was part of your job. Then you went to class all day long. At the end of class, faculty supervised your lunch, they supervised your dinner, they supervised your study, and then you went to bed. And you got up. And higher education was a pretty monotonous activity because there were faculty with you all the time. Different life now. We've changed a great deal. And yet, here's a phrase that I think describes what goes on every day. Now, this was written at a time when education was mostly focused on men. In fact, entirely and exclusively. When a group of young men come together, even if there be no one to teach them, the conversation of all becomes a series of lectures to each, and each one learns new ways of thinking, should be doing, and judging day by day. Think about all of the peer interaction that goes on in a classroom, whether it be in 5th grade, where a young lady used to kick my shins, and I couldn't understand why she kicked my shins so much that I had sores on my shins for the entire 5th grade, until somebody let me know that's because she liked me. This was written by John Henry Cardinal Newman. If you've ever been in the campus Newman Center, they're named after him. And he did this in the idea of the university in 1852. Now, this whole thing can be downloaded from the internet. I've spent many years as a faculty advisor, nearly 50. I've been many years as a fraternity volunteer, which is a very, very interesting group of young men. It's a volunteer group. Think about what leaders of volunteer groups have to do. They have to somehow motivate their members without any prospect, particularly of reward, to achieve toward a common goal. And if they can motivate their members to achieve towards a common goal, think about what that represents in terms of 30 and 40 years later. When, like some of my fraternity brothers, they're the chief executive officer of McDonald's, of Wendy's, of General Motors, and Ford Motor Company. That's just one fraternity. That's just one organization. Those are just a few places. Oh, we can put in United Parcel Service too. I've served as president of the Center for the Study of the College Fraternity because my line of research is the college fraternity. Now that's an active link. If you're interested in that, when you take the PowerPoint and you download it to your own computer, then you can get the active links. And I'm amongst the founders of hazingprevention.org in 2007. If you wish to get to my works, there's where you can. bepress.com, Charles Eberly. Now, a lot of my comments are going to come from these two pieces: finding faculty advisors to deter violence and the benefits of having a faculty advisor. And that's focused on higher education. It is up to you to make the translation to junior high and senior high education, where you're junior high and senior high educators. Because the essential functions and activities outside of the classroom working with student groups is the same. Who has the integrity to speak up? Who has the integrity to be the bystander that says, hey, what's going on here? what did you just do, son? What did you just do, young lady? And have you thought about what it really means? That's a job that teachers have. And yes, I suppose it's tied to the Illinois learning standards. It's those 50 minutes we're talking about. But to me, it's not the 50 minutes that is informal instruction in the classroom. It's that teachable moment that happens when you see, when you hear, experience someone make a bullying comment, an inappropriate comment, and you take them aside and you say, hey, had you thought about what you just said? Are you sure you really mean what you just said? Are you surely you really mean what you just did? Because see, we all need accountability partners. And in that respect, as advisors and student groups, we're some of those students' accountability partners. And we're the role models to help other students in those groups learn how to be accountability partners. Now, has anybody read anything in the sports page over the last month about accountability partners? There's a fine article about a young man who's famous. He has an accountability partner. And he keeps in contact with that accountability partner to help him focus on what he does as an athlete, to help him focus on who he is as a person. And I would submit to you that you have been training all your lives to be accountability partners in the same way that Tim Tebow has an accountability partner. Maybe we haven't thought of it that way, but here we are. We're accountability partners. Now, National Hazing Prevention Week was last week, and if you picked up the button, Hazing Hurts, and there's a brochure in your handouts from them. That's the origin. They have some of the best resources available in terms of hazing prevention anywhere on the internet. This is hazing prevention. These are ideas, these are bullet points, practical activities. But it's not research. And that's one of the points, if you notice, that Dr. Esplanade made, that there's a difference between people making presentations and people doing research. Now, I'd like to make a differentiation between presentations on the one hand and research on the other hand. Bullying speakers, anti-bullying convocations. Think of them as dosages. Dosages. Medicine, if you will. And you expect a single dosage of something to change a student body, to change a group. And if you do, well, go right ahead if you wish, if that's what you believe. But I am convinced that single dosage activities are ineffective. What is effective is when you, as an individual, can communicate with an individual or a group, upbraid them if you have to, and then come back week after week after week and encourage better behavior, better experiences. If you're interested in high school, because I'm much more familiar with secondary than I am junior high ed, or college hazing, the Novak Institute for Hazing Institute is a place to go. It gets sold out every year. We're talking about all of these issues and the issues that go on as students get older. Fortunately, students do get older. I meet young boys who enter college in their freshman year. And I've done this now for almost 50 years. I was one of those young boys once. And I wonder how they will ever get in out of the rain. And yet they grow older. And by golly, they do get in out of the rain. They become responsible people. Here are some seminars that are free. One's Building Partnerships Prevention. Another word is Progress and Challenges with Hazing and Bullying Prevention. And there are links there. You can sign up, and they're free of cost. So those you may find useful. The hazing update is by another company. Hey, this is a popular topic. You know that. And a lot of folks are willing to pay for it. The Human Equation, hazing online courses. I'm on the advisory board for the development of these online courses. And that's also a pay item. It's often used by high schools and colleges, and students like taking alcohol EDU are required to go through those courses on certain campuses. So what's the difference here between bullying and hazing? This is from Elizabeth Allen and Mary Madden. And they're picking up on the kinds of definitions that Dr. Esplanade was using earlier this morning. Now, hazing, bullying, is not limited to individual situations, but it's also limited to team situations. And my area of interest happens to be college fraternities or college student groups. For many of you, it's the sports teams or the athletes that you work with or the students that you work with. Every one of them is important. Here's the criteria that she used from the fellow from Finland. And I was tickled that I repeated the same thing she did. I found it interesting when she said, this, as much as it has been repeated, has never been empirically tested. Fascinating. There's a doctoral dissertation out here for somebody in this group. Here, closer to making bullying definition closer to hazing. To perform dangerous, illegal, or inappropriate action. Or you have the disapproval of a group. See, this is where the good kids get in trouble. But there's something else going on here. Whether among women's groups or amongst men's groups. I'm more familiar with men's groups because that's where my line of research is more focused. And I'll use the phrase, performing masculinity. And you folks in junior high school are really at a major point in young men's lives where they're getting all kinds of messages about what being masculine, what being a man represents. And they're looking over their shoulders very, very carefully to make sure that they perform the masculinity that they think their buddies think they ought to perform, so they're accepted as a young man. So a lot of things happen because of young men's misperceptions of what it takes, what is required, what is expected to be a man. We've got a lot to learn about that area. Hazing kills. Now that quote is referring to the research of Hank Newer, who is a professor of journalism at Franklin College in Indiana. Frank has written 4 books on hazing. if you want to read about hazing and some of the effects of hazing, the lifelong effects of hazing, there's the man to read. Now, I apologize, I forgot something. I need an accountability partner. Anybody willing to volunteer? Great. Tell me when I'm 35 minutes in. Yeah. Because I just screwed up and forgot to request that. Now maybe you make an estimate. If you like, because Hank tallies all hazing deaths, really, are they murders? By affiliation or student organization or sports team? Yes?
Sir, you're already in 35 minutes.
Damn it. Okay. There we go. See, I am used to 2.5 hours because I teach in graduate school. And I get on a roll and I forget. It's really terrible when I'm teaching a 7 o'clock class because I forget about the time. And I usually depend on the next prof coming in the room, you see. Okay, let me make some very quick moves here, thanks. I'm glad I caught it that way. We got attitudes toward hazing. Students don't identify hazing as hazing. And in fact, they think there's a protective factor that they're not going to get hurt. But it happens. They only identify extreme forms of hazing. I can tell you from other research I've done, that same thing is true for alcohol and other drug use and for sexual assault and rape. It's not any different. So there's something universal that needs to be addressed that we have yet, as teachers and leaders, addressed. Challenge is communication. How well can we communicate with our students? Now, I'm not talking about 50 minutes in a classroom, informal instructions. I'm simply talking about what you do to interact with your students on a day-to-day caring basis, to let them know, because they will not believe you, as you know, until they believe you care. We change the atmosphere of a room. And it's our job not to say, don't do this, don't do that, but to encourage students to live their best lives. Now think about smoking cessation. For years we talked about don't smoke, it's dangerous, it's dirty. We didn't really start to make real progress in smoking cessation until we started saying, live your best life. And you can live your best life and run your farthest if your lungs aren't full of coal tar. We made a difference. What does a faculty fellow, a faculty member working with student groups add to that student group? Greater academic engagement, higher non-academic engagement. That's the difference that you make when you work with groups, when you encourage groups and speak in a positive manner. There's a difference. That's across 20 years at Eastern Illinois University. Maybe some of you know these fraternities. This is the only fraternity on this campus that across that period of time has always had a faculty advisor. That's simply counting whether in each semester they've been above or below the all-men's GPA. So, chapters with higher academic performance, fewer risk management issues, healthier environments. Here's an illustration from one fraternity. Now, one of the problems with fraternities is they won't share data with each other because it might make a competitive advantage or disadvantage over one organization to the other one. So the only kind of data I have, whether it be from Lambda Chi Alpha, that demonstrates that their programs help students boost self-esteem far greater than other programs. Or this one is they're within organizations. They're not across organizations. Unfortunately, a lot of the research that's carried out is muddled, or I might say muggled, because organizations are all dumped together. And there are good, solid organizations on a campus or in a high school, and there are weak organizations that are not healthy. And yet we lump them together when we do an analysis. Shouldn't be done. In 1999, this group had $700 and some thousand worth of liability insurance claims. In 2001, if we look here and we see the grades, as the grades for the 240 some chapters in this organization increased, liability claims dropped. There's evidence that recruiting better men who get better grades makes a difference. Hey, everybody has to have liability insurance. All these groups have to have liability insurance. There's been some fraternities in the news over the last several days. Maybe you've noticed one that had quite a bout with, what is it called, Franzia wine? Are you familiar? Are you all know what I'm referring to? Yeah, there was a group in Tennessee that decided they would use wine, only use it as an enema. And one of the fellows had a 0.4 blood alcohol content, almost died. And that's still in the news. That's an embarrassment. I can tell you that that organization has an insurance rate twice the organization that I just described on the prior screen. One's at $250 a man, this is at $130 a man. Now, where in higher education do we have a problem? We have to be the economic, intellectual engine that drives the American economy. So we don't have the time that we used to have to be faculty advisors. And yet faculty advisors are tremendously important to the progress of student groups. We have this phrase called student engagement. Maybe you have one in junior high education and high school education to getting students involved in the classroom. This is the higher education term. Engagements of students with faculty members markedly increases persistence to graduation. Membership in student organizations where students identify with an organization that they have friends and that they don't want to leave markedly increases persistence to graduation. Identifying with clubs and organizations in high school markedly increases persistence to high school graduation. Clubs and organizations are extremely important. Extremely. Because it gives something that I can work with my peers and I can share the love. I can share the camaraderie and the feeling of being a part of something that's bigger than myself. Unfortunately, faculty members, their idea of student engagement seem to think that it's like I'm doing right now. Somehow you're engaged and I'm the leader. I don't buy that. We have to make a difference in students' lives. Oops, maybe I'll try the second time. We have to overcome our fears of age and relevance. We have to take the risk to walk with students on their turf and not on ours. Very few people, very few teachers do that. And I'm biased here, of course. I have to think teachers in phys ed do it best, but that's my bias. Faculty have to engage with students on their turf as much as students engage with faculty on their turf. So we have to teach students that it's important to stop in and see faculty during their office hours and get to know them as human beings. There are a lot of great things that faculty do outside the classroom that are really pretty exciting. Most students know the right thing to do. They're not out there trying to do the wrong thing. They need affirmation. They need approval. And our job is to help these folks define who they are, because they will lead the next generation. An old man going a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm, vast and deep and wide, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. That sullen stream had no fears for him. But he turned when he reached the other side and built a bridge to span the tide. "Old man," said a fellow pilgrim near, "you're wasting strength in building here. Your journey will end with the ending day. You never again must pass this way. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build you the bridge at eventide?" The builder lifted his old gray head. "Good friend, in the path I've come," he said, "there followeth after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. This chasm that has been naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the quiet twilight dim. Good friend, I'm building the bridge for him." Now, I bet I've gone over my 50 minutes. Huh? I'm right at it? Well, at least I survived that part. Now, on the end of this is my email address. And I'm willing to take questions on that, since we don't have the time I would wish for questions here. And I can support you in the work and the interest you're doing if you ask me questions. And that's part of building this bridge. Did you have one?
Yeah, you said all of this is available online, and you gave us one link in the middle of it, but where's a link just to get to this whole presentation?
This is on the Building Bridges, the BVC website. Was linked up to the website. So my presentation's there. And I think these videos that they're taking will also be on the website. So you'll have them later. Does the excitement continue? All right, then you got those forms to fill out, which I developed for exactly this purpose. Please fill them out, and then as you leave the room, if you hand them to the room monitor, I think that's just outside the door, and go on to the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let the excitement continue.